For 50 years, the old mechanic fixed cars for free when people couldn't pay. He never turned anyone away, never asked for anything in return. But when cancer drained his savings and the bank came to take his shop, he had nothing left. On auction day, the entire town showed up with cash in their pockets. They bought every single tool, every piece of equipment, every memory. And then they did something that would change his life forever. Hey, if you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. I've got something really special coming for you tomorrow, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. The morning started like any other for Thomas Hayes. He arrived at his shop at 6:15, just as the sun began painting the horizon with streaks of amber and gold. His joints ached more than usual as he unlocked the heavy door, the same door he'd been opening for 50 years. The sign above still read Hayes Auto Repair in faded red letters, though the paint had been peeling for the better part of a decade. Thomas never bothered to fix it. He was too busy fixing everything else. Inside, the familiar smell of motor oil and metal welcomed him home. This wasn't just a shop. It was a cathedral of second chances, a place where broken things became whole again. The walls were lined with tools that had shaped his entire adult life, each wrench and socket telling its own story. In the corner sat the hydraulic lift he'd installed in 1978, still working perfectly despite its age. Thomas ran his weathered hand along the workbench, feeling every groove and stain, every memory embedded in the wood. He'd bought this place when he was 23 years old, fresh out of the service and looking for something solid to build a life around. Back then, Millbrook was a thriving town with 3,000 residents, 2 diners, and a movie theater that showed films every Friday night. Now the population had dwindled to just under 2,000. 1 diner remained, and the theater had become a dollar store. But Hayes Auto Repair had endured through it all, a constant in a changing world. Thomas shuffled to his small office at the back of the shop and started the coffee maker, another ritual as old as the building itself. While the machine gurgled and hissed, he pulled out his worn leather-bound notebook where he kept track of appointments. Tuesday the 15th. 3 oil changes scheduled, 1 transmission job, and Mrs. Patterson's sedan that had been making that funny clicking sound. A light day, which was good considering how tired he'd been feeling lately. But there was something else written in the margin of that page, something that made his chest tighten every time he looked at it. Auction. 9 a.m. Final notice. Thomas closed the notebook quickly, as if hiding the words would make them less real. He'd been fighting this battle for 8 months now, ever since the diagnosis that changed everything. Stage 3 colon cancer, the doctor had said, his face grave but not without hope. Treatable but expensive. Very expensive. The treatments had started immediately. Chemotherapy every other week, radiation, medications that cost more than his monthly mortgage. Thomas had insurance, but it covered maybe 60% of the actual costs. The rest fell on him, and the bills piled up faster than he could manage. He drained his savings account in the first 3 months. By month 5, he'd taken a second mortgage on the shop. By month 7, he'd stopped being able to make the payments. The bank had been patient at first. They knew Thomas, knew his reputation, knew he was good for the money eventually. But eventually never came. The medical bills kept growing, and his ability to work kept shrinking. There were days when the exhaustion from treatment left him unable to lift a wrench, let alone crawl under a car. His income dropped by half, then by 3/4. The second mortgage went into default. 3 months ago, the foreclosure notice arrived. Thomas had sat in the same office, holding that piece of paper, feeling like the walls were closing in. He called the bank, tried to negotiate, begged for more time. They'd given him 90 days. Now those 90 days were up. Thomas poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down heavily in his chair. The leather was cracked and faded, shaped perfectly to his body after decades of use. He looked around the office at the photographs on the walls. There he was in 1975, shaking hands with the mayor after fixing the town's fire truck for free. Another photo showed him at a high school graduation, presenting a scholarship he'd quietly funded for 20 years. More pictures showed him at weddings, baptisms, funerals. 50 years of life, all contained within these 4 walls. He'd never married, never had children of his own. The shop was his family. The people of Millbrook were his sons and daughters. And now he was about to lose them all. The bell above the door chimed, pulling Thomas from his thoughts. He stood up, wincing at the stiffness in his back, and walked out to the main floor. Standing in the doorway was Marcus Chen, the owner of Chen's Hardware down the street. Marcus was 42, tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair at his temples. He held his cap in his hands, turning it nervously. "Morning, Thomas," Marcus said quietly. "Morning, Marcus. What brings you by so early?" Marcus shifted his weight from foot to foot. "I heard about today. About the auction." Thomas nodded slowly. "News travels fast in a small town. I wanted to come by before it all starts." Marcus paused, searching for words. "You fixed my dad's truck back in '89. Remember? He'd just lost his job at the mill, and we didn't have any money. You not only fixed it for free, but you gave him gas money to get to job interviews. You told him to pay you back when he got on his feet." "I remember," Thomas said softly. "He never got the chance. He passed away that winter. Heart attack." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "But I never forgot what you did." "None of us have forgotten, Thomas." Before Thomas could respond, Marcus pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "This won't cover everything, I know that. But it's something. It's all I can spare right now, but it's yours." Thomas held up his hand. "Marcus, no. I can't take your money." "You can and you will," Marcus said firmly, pressing the envelope into Thomas's hand. "You've given to this town for 50 years. Let us give back for once." The envelope felt heavy in Thomas's palm. He opened it slowly and found $3,000 in cash. His eyes widened. "Marcus, this is too much. You've got your own family to think about." "My family has a roof over their heads because of you," Marcus replied. 2 years ago, when the hardware store was struggling and I couldn't afford to fix my delivery van, you did it for free. You kept my business alive. This is just returning the favor." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just know that you're not alone in this." Marcus placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder, squeezed once, then turned and left. Thomas stood there holding the envelope, feeling the weight of it in more ways than one. $3,000. It was generous beyond words, but it wasn't enough. The bank wanted $47,000 to clear the debt. He was still so far from that number it might as well have been $1 million. He returned to his office and placed the envelope in his desk drawer. Then he sat down and waited. The auction was scheduled for 9 o'clock. At 8:45, he heard vehicles pulling into the parking lot. Lots of vehicles. Thomas walked to the window and looked out. His breath caught in his throat. The small parking lot was filled with trucks and cars, and more were parking along the street. He recognized nearly every vehicle. There was Sheriff Davidson's cruiser, the bright red pickup belonging to the Rodriguez family, old Mrs. Patterson's sedan, the one with the clicking sound, Pastor Williams's van from the Methodist Church. Dozens of people were getting out, gathering in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. What were they all doing here? At 9 o'clock sharp, a black sedan pulled up. 2 men in suits emerged, followed by a woman carrying a clipboard and a portable speaker system. The bank representatives. The lead man, whose name Thomas remembered as Peter Morrison, set up a small folding table near the garage entrance. The woman placed papers on the table and plugged in the speaker. Thomas felt like he was watching his own funeral. He forced himself to walk outside, to face what was coming. As he emerged from the shop, a hush fell over the crowd. Every eye turned to him. He saw faces he'd known for decades. Sarah Mitchell, whose first car he'd helped her buy when she was 16. James Foster, whose wedding he'd attended last spring. Little Tommy Rodriguez, now not so little, who used to hang around the shop every summer learning about engines. "Good morning, everyone," Peter Morrison said into a microphone, his voice echoing across the lot. "We're here today to conduct a foreclosure auction for the property and assets of Hayes Auto Repair. The minimum bid to halt foreclosure is $47,000, to be paid in full, in cash, by the end of business today. Failing that, All property, equipment, and assets will be sold individually to the highest bidder. Morrison paused, looking around. Is there anyone present who wishes to make a bid on the property as a whole? Silence. Thomas had expected this. Who in Millbrook had $47,000 in cash lying around? The town was barely hanging on as it was. Very well, Morrison continued. We'll proceed with the individual asset auction. First item, a snap-on roller cabinet tool chest, fully loaded, estimated value $3,000. Do I hear an opening bid? $5,000, a voice called out. Thomas turned, stunned. It was Jack Sullivan, who owned the dairy farm on the north edge of town. $5,000 for a tool chest worth $3,000? Morrison blinked, clearly surprised. I have $5,000. Do I hear $5,500? It's $5,000 or nothing, Jack said firmly. Take it or leave it. Morrison glanced at his colleagues, who shrugged. Sold to bidder number 1 for $5,000. Jack walked forward, counted out $5,100 bills, and received a receipt. 2 of his farmhands came forward and began loading the tool chest onto his truck. Next item, Morrison continued, a Lincoln Electric arc welder, estimated value $1,200. $2,000, Sarah Mitchell called out immediately. Sold for $2,000. Next, a complete socket set, Craftsman professional grade, estimated value $400. $1,000, Pastor Williams said, raising his hand. Sold for $1,000. Thomas watched in growing confusion as item after item sold for double or triple its estimated value. His hydraulic lift, valued at $5,000, went for $10,000. His air compressor, valued at $800, sold for $2,000. His entire collection of diagnostic equipment, worth maybe $1,500 total, was purchased by the Rodriguez family for $4,000. What was happening? Why were they paying so much? The auction continued for 2 hours. Every single person in the crowd bought something. The high school principal purchased a set of wrenches. The librarian bought his old metal desk. The owner of the diner took his coffee maker. People were buying things that had no practical value to them whatsoever, paying amounts that made no financial sense. And then Thomas understood. His knees nearly buckled with the realization. They weren't buying his tools. They were buying his freedom. But even as his heart swelled with gratitude, he felt a crushing sadness. These were good people, generous people, but they were also struggling people. Millbrook wasn't a wealthy town. Every dollar they were spending here was a dollar taken from their own families, their own needs. They were sacrificing for him, and while it touched him deeply, it also felt wrong. He didn't deserve this. He'd just been doing what any decent person would do. By 11:30, every item in the shop had been sold. Peter Morrison tallied the receipts, his expression growing more puzzled with each addition. Finally, he looked up. The total comes to $43,200, he announced. There was a collective intake of breath. They were close, so close, but still short by $3,800. Thomas felt his hope deflate like a punctured tire. They tried. God, they tried so hard. But it wasn't enough. We're still short of the required amount, Morrison said, his voice taking on an official tone. Therefore, the property itself will now be auctioned. The building and land, as is, minimum bid of $4,000 to cover the remaining debt. Do I hear $4,000? Silence fell over the crowd like a heavy blanket. Thomas could see people checking their wallets, their faces anguished. They'd given everything they could. There was nothing left. $4,000, Morrison repeated. Going once. Wait, a voice from the back of the crowd. Everyone turned. An old pickup truck had pulled up, badly rusted, with a camper shell on the back. The door opened and out stepped a man Thomas barely recognized. It was Daniel McCarthy, but not the Daniel McCarthy that Thomas remembered. The last time Thomas had seen Danny, it had been 15 years ago. Danny had been 17, angry at the world, heading down a dangerous path. He'd stolen a car and crashed it trying to outrun the police. He'd been sent to juvenile detention, then disappeared from town. Looking at him now, Thomas saw a man transformed. Danny was clean-cut, wearing work clothes, but there was something different in his eyes. Clarity. Purpose. Danny walked through the crowd, which parted to let him pass. He stopped in front of Morrison and pulled out a worn wallet. "I've got 4,000, Danny said quietly. Morrison nodded. "Very well. For $1,000. Going once, going twice, sold to bidder number 47. He stamped the paperwork. "The debt is cleared. The foreclosure is cancelled." A cheer erupted from the crowd, but Thomas couldn't take his eyes off Danny. The young man turned to face him, and Thomas saw tears streaming down his weathered face. "Mr. Hayes," Danny said, his voice shaking, "you probably don't remember me." "I remember you, Danny," Thomas said softly. "I remember that scared kid who made a big mistake." Danny nodded, wiping his eyes. "When I got out of juvie, I had nothing. No family, no friends, nowhere to go. I came back here looking for work, and every door slammed in my face. Every door except yours. You hired me, let me sleep in your office when I had nowhere else to go. Taught me how to be a mechanic. You gave me a chance when nobody else would." Thomas did remember now. Danny had worked for him for 2 years, learning the trade, getting his life together. Then one day he'd come in and said he'd gotten an apprenticeship at a big shop in Denver. Thomas had been proud, had driven him to the bus station himself. "You told me something I never forgot," Danny continued. "You said that every man deserves a second chance, and every second chance deserves an honest effort. I took that to heart, Mr. Hayes. I worked hard, stayed clean, built a life. I own my own shop now in Colorado Springs. 2 locations, actually. I've got 12 employees and a reputation for giving people second chances, just like you gave me." He gestured to the cash in Morrison's hand. "That 4,000 is just the start. I've got more. I want to buy the property from you, Mr. Hayes. I'll pay you $150,000 for the building and the land. Fair market value. And I want you to stay on as a consultant, teach my guys the way you taught me. Salary, benefits, health insurance. The whole package." Thomas couldn't speak. His throat had closed up completely. He shook his head, trying to process what he was hearing. "You saved my life," Danny said simply. "Let me return the favor." The crowd erupted again, but Thomas barely heard it. He looked around at all these faces, all these people he'd helped over the years, never expecting anything in return. And here they were, giving him everything. "There's one condition," Danny added, pulling a piece of paper from his pocket. "The shop's name changes. I already had this made." He unfolded the paper. It was a design for a new sign, Hayes and Sons Auto Repair. Underneath, in smaller letters, "Because family isn't always blood. We're all your sons and daughters, Mr. Hayes," Danny said. "Every person here. You raised us, taught us, showed us what it means to be decent human beings. So yeah, you're stuck with us. We're family now." Thomas felt something break inside him. Some dam that had been holding back 50 years of loneliness, of quiet sacrifice, of wondering if anything he did mattered. It all came pouring out in tears that he couldn't control, didn't want to control. He reached out and pulled Danny into an embrace, and then suddenly everyone was there, surrounding him, holding him up, holding him together. But the story wasn't over. Not yet, because as the crowd began to disperse, as people started loading the tools and equipment into their vehicles, something strange began to happen. Instead of driving away, they all drove to Thomas's house, a small 2-bedroom place just 3 blocks from the shop. Thomas rode with Danny, too overwhelmed to drive himself, watching in confusion as the caravan of vehicles followed them home. When they arrived, people began unloading everything. The tools, the equipment, the desk, the coffee maker. Everything that had been sold just hours before. They carried it all into Thomas's garage, into his basement, stacking it carefully, organizing it exactly as it had been in the shop. Thomas stood in his driveway, watching this impossible scene unfold. "I don't understand," he said to no one in particular. Marcus Chun appeared beside him, grinning. "We bought it all to pay off your debt, Thomas. But it's still yours. It was always yours. We were just holding it for you." "But Danny, he said he wanted to buy the property," he said. "I do want to buy it," Danny interrupted, walking over. But not to take it from you. I want to buy it and lease it back to you for $1 a year. The deed will be in your name, but the mortgage will be in mine. You're not losing your shop, Mr. Hayes. You're keeping it. You're keeping everything. Thomas looked around at all these faces, these beautiful, generous, impossible faces, and he realized something that he'd been too blind to see for 50 years. He'd spent his whole life thinking he was alone, that he had no family, that all he had was his work. But he'd been building a family all along, one act of kindness at a time, one fixed car at a time, one second chance at a time. I don't deserve this, he whispered. That's exactly why you do, Sheriff Davidson said, clapping him on the shoulder. You never asked for anything, never expected anything. You just gave and gave and gave. Well, now it's our turn. And you're going to let us, because that's what family does. The next few hours passed in a blur. More people arrived with food, transforming Thomas's living room into an impromptu celebration. Children ran around the yard. Someone set up a grill. The smell of burgers and hot dogs filled the air. Music played from someone's truck radio. Felt like a holiday, like the whole town had decided to take the day off just to be together. As the sun began to set, Thomas found himself sitting on his front porch, watching the scene before him. Danny sat down beside him, handing him a cold beer. How'd you know? Thomas asked. About the auction? Marcus called me last week, Danny said. Told me what was happening. I got in my truck and drove straight through. 18 hours. I wasn't going to let you lose that shop, Mr. Hayes. Not after everything you did for me. Thomas took a sip of beer. I just gave you a job. You gave me a life, Danny corrected. There's a difference. And speaking of which, I meant what I said about the consultant position. I really do want you to come out to Colorado Springs a few times a year, help train my guys, show them how to run a shop the right way. Your way. I don't know if I'm up for that kind of travel anymore, Thomas admitted. The cancer, the treatments, they've taken a lot out of me. How are you doing? Danny asked gently. With the cancer, I mean. Thomas was quiet for a moment. The last scan showed it's shrinking. The treatments are working. Doctor says if it keeps going this way, I might be looking at remission in another 6 months. That's great news. Yeah, but the bills keep coming. Even with what happened today, I'm still looking at probably another year of treatment, maybe more. The medical costs, they're not stopping just because the shop is saved. Danny smiled. About that, remember I said salary and benefits? I meant good benefits. The kind that cover cancer treatment. The kind that cover everything. You'll be on my company's health insurance plan starting next week. I've already talked to my HR person. It's all set up. Thomas stared at him. Danny, you can't do that. The premiums for someone in my condition, they'll be astronomical. I can and I will, Danny said firmly. And before you argue, let me tell you something. Last year, my shops did $2.3 million in revenue. I'm doing fine, Mr. Hayes. More than fine. And every bit of that success, every single dollar, exists because you gave a screwed-up kid a chance when nobody else would. So yeah, I'm covering your health insurance. Deal with it. Thomas couldn't find words. He just nodded, looking out at the crowd of people in his yard, in his home, treating his space like it was their own. Because it was. Because they were family. As darkness fell, someone started a fire in Thomas's old fire pit. People gathered around it, telling stories. Thomas listened as person after person shared memories of times he'd helped them. Moments he'd barely remembered, but that had meant the world to them. Sarah Mitchell talked about how Thomas had taught her to change a tire when she was 16, and how that one lesson had given her the confidence to drive cross-country to college, even though her parents had been against it. James Foster described the day his transmission died right before his wedding, and how Thomas had worked through the night to fix it, refusing payment, saying that a man's wedding day was sacred. Mrs. Patterson, tears in her eyes, told everyone about how Thomas had driven her to the hospital when her husband had his heart attack, had sat with her in the waiting room for 6 hours, and had never mentioned it again. Story after story, memory after memory, painting a picture of a life that Thomas had never fully understood he was living. He'd just been doing what seemed right, what seemed necessary. But to everyone else, he'd been a hero. Pastor Williams stood up, his voice carrying across the yard. I've been the pastor of Millbrook Methodist for 22 years. In that time, I've presided over hundreds of services, counseled countless people, tried my best to embody the teachings of Christ. But I've never met anyone who lived those teachings more purely than Thomas Hayes. He fed the hungry by keeping people's cars running so they could get to work. He clothed the naked by making sure parents could afford to transport their children. He visited the imprisoned by giving second chances to people society had written off. He did all of this without asking for anything in return, without seeking recognition, without even realizing the impact he was having. The pastor paused, looking directly at Thomas. The Bible says that faith without works is dead. Thomas, you've shown us what living faith looks like. You've taught this entire town what it means to love your neighbor. And today we got the chance to show you that love returned. This isn't charity, Thomas. This is justice. This is the world working the way it's supposed to work. The crowd murmured in agreement, and Thomas felt tears threatening again. He'd cried more today than he had in his entire adult life, and he was past the point of being embarrassed about it. As the night wore on, people began to leave, hugging Thomas one by one, telling him they'd see him at the shop, reminding him that Monday was Mrs. Patterson's appointment for that clicking sound. Life would go on. The shop would reopen. Nothing had really changed except everything had changed. By 11 o'clock, only a few people remained. Danny helped Thomas clean up the yard, collecting paper plates and empty bottles. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who understand each other. You heading back to Colorado tomorrow? Thomas asked. Day after, Danny said. Figured I'd stick around, help you get the shop back in order. Plus, there's some paperwork we need to handle. Deeds, leases, all that legal stuff. My lawyer's driving up tomorrow morning. You really thought of everything. I learned from the best. They finished cleaning and stood together in the quiet yard, looking up at the stars. The sky was clear, the Milky Way visible in all its glory, something you could only see this well in small towns far from city lights. Danny, Thomas said quietly, thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You already did, Danny replied. 15 years ago, when you gave me that second chance. Everything I have, everything I am, it all started in that shop. You planted a seed, Mr. Hayes. Today, you just got to see the tree. Thomas nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. They stood there for a few more minutes, then Danny headed to his truck. He'd be sleeping in Thomas's guest room, but wanted to grab his overnight bag first. Alone on his porch, Thomas sat down in his rocking chair and let the day wash over him. This morning, he'd woken up believing he was going to lose everything. Now, as midnight approached, he had more than he'd ever imagined possible. Not just his shop, not just his tools, but something infinitely more valuable. Proof that his life had mattered. Proof that kindness returned. Proof that family wasn't about blood, but about choice and love and showing up when it counted. He thought about all the years he'd spent alone, thinking that was his lot in life. The confirmed bachelor, married to his work, no children to carry on his name. But sitting here now, he realized how wrong he'd been. He had dozens of children. Hundreds, maybe, if he counted everyone he'd helped over 50 years. And today, those children had saved their father. The screen door opened and Danny came out, bag in hand. You okay out here? He asked. Yeah, Thomas said, and he meant it. Yeah, I'm better than okay. Good, because tomorrow we've got work to do. I want to talk to you about some ideas I have for the shop. Not changing anything, just some improvements. Better diagnostic equipment, maybe an apprenticeship program for high school kids. Give them a chance to learn a trade. You know? Like you did, Thomas said with a smile. Exactly like I did. Danny paused. And Mr. Hayes? I was thinking maybe we expand on that sign. Hayes and Sons, that's good. But what about Hayes and Sons and Daughters? Make it clear that everyone's welcome. Everyone gets a shot. Thomas felt his chest swell with pride. I think that's perfect. Danny grinned and headed inside. Thomas remained on the porch for a while longer, rocking slowly, listening to the crickets sing. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car drove past, the driver waving even though it was too dark to see who was behind the wheel. Just a friendly gesture in a friendly town. Tomorrow, Thomas would go back to work. He'd open the shop, turn on the lights, fire up the coffee maker. He'd fix Mrs. Patterson's clicking sound and change oil and diagnose check engine lights. He'd do what he'd always done, because that's who he was. But now he'd do it with the knowledge that he wasn't alone, had never been alone, would never be alone again. The shop would have a new sign, Hayes and Sons and Daughters, because family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's built one repaired car at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one second chance at a time. Sometimes family is an entire town that shows up when you need them most, that gives everything they have because you gave everything you had first. Thomas stood up slowly, his joints protesting but his heart light. He looked up at the stars one more time, whispered a quiet thank you to whoever might be listening, and went inside. Tomorrow was a new day, the first day of the rest of his life, the first day of understanding what he'd had all along. He climbed into bed and closed his eyes, and for the first time in months, sleep came easily. He dreamed of the shop, of tools and engines and the smell of motor oil. But mostly he dreamed of faces. Smiling faces, grateful faces, faces of the family he'd built without ever realizing it. Outside, the town of Millbrook slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that one of their own was safe, that justice had been done, that love had won. And in garages and sheds and basements all over town, the tools and equipment sat waiting, ready to be returned to their rightful home, ready to continue their work of fixing broken things and giving second chances. Because that's what Hayes Auto Repair had always been about. Not just fixing cars, but fixing lives. And today, 50 years of fixed lives had come together to fix the life of the man who'd fixed them all. The circle was complete. The debt was paid. The family was whole. And Thomas Hayes, who had spent 50 years thinking he had nobody, finally understood that he had everybody. And that made all the difference.